So the other scenario where we don't have mitochondria, there are some eukaryotic organisms where they have some cells that do not have mitochondria. Red blood cells, for example, do not typically carry mitochondria with them. So they still need energy. Those red blood cells still need ATP. So what do? Well, they'll consume glucose and they'll push it through glycolysis. They'll generate very quickly some small amount of ATP through that process. Again, glycolysis, we put 2 ATP in and we get 4 ATPs back out. And then we get also some NADH, which adds some energy as well. So glycolysis requires no oxygen. This is anaerobic because there's no oxygen. It's anaerobic respiration. And that glycolysis step is always required in the aerobic respiration cycle. But some cells that don't have mitochondria, that's all they do. It's just the glycolysis portion. And that still generates, as I said, 2 ATP total, because they put 2 in, they get 4 out. So they do get some ATP through that process. And it works just fine. And then what happens? Well, the pyruvates just have to go somewhere, right? And there's some things that they can do, and we'll talk about that in a second. We have what we call fermentation. That's kind of where we're headed here. Let's talk a little bit about fermentation. To set us up, if we just look at this glycolysis reaction, again, you've got the NAD ion that gets reduced. We add the electron to it, and then it picks up a hydrogen. And now I've got NADH, this high energy reduced compound. But to get back to where I've got NADA ions, something has to take the electron and the hydrogen off of this guy. And so where does that go? Well, something has to do that. As we mentioned, in aerobic respiration, eventually that ends up on oxygens to generate water. But when we don't have this option, and there's no aerobic respiration down here, something else has to take the hydrogen and the electron off these NADHs to replace the NAD ions so glycolysis can continue. So what does that? Well, fermentation is when a cell uses some sort of organic molecule to accept the electron in the absence of oxygen. So again, we've got to turn this NADH back into NAD ion. We've got to remove an electron and a hydrogen from it. Well, one way we can do that is a cell can produce ethanol. So that is an organic molecule that can accept that electron, and it generates ethanol, and that works just fine. And this is actually how we get wine. We've done this for millennia. And beer and other spirits a lot of times are fermented using an ethanol fermentation process. Those microbes, if we don't provide them a lot of oxygen, they've got to generate ATP somehow. And the way they'll do it is they'll produce ethanol. There are microbes in ruminant organisms like cows and sheep. There are microbes within their stomachs and their digestive tract that will actually generate methane. They'll take CO2 and they'll reduce it, and then we add hydrogens to that, and that generates methane. So one carbon, you can add 4 hydrogens to it, and that gives us methane. And it'd be kind of neat if we could figure out a way to do that large scale and harvest that. That's something engineers look at. Can we do that large scale, take CO2 and turn it into methane easily? But that would be through a fermentation process where we're not using oxygen, we're using some other organic molecule to turn from glycolysis this NADH back into an NAD ion to keep the process going. In red blood cells, there are, as we said, there's no mitochondria in red blood cells, and also in muscle cells. They consume a lot of oxygen, they need a lot of energy, and when they run out of that oxygen, they can't then put the results of glycolysis into the citric acid cycle because there's no oxygen to drive that process anymore. So what do? Well, they can convert this pyruvate through putting the NAD back into, basically the energy off of this molecule back into the pyruvate and convert it to lactate or lactic acid. And then you generate this NAD ion that can go back, and it's ready to go back through the glycolysis reaction because, again, we're still getting a good amount of energy off of this very quickly. And then this lactate or the lactic acid then can be removed through the bloodstream to somewhere else where it can easily be broken down and converted. All right, so I'm a little over 5 minutes on this video. I'm going to stop there and pick up on the next one.